Sometimes betrayal comes from the one who promised forever. Watch how a woman's heartbreak turns into empowerment in the most unexpected way. Comment where you're watching from. Rate this story 1 to 10. And subscribe. The moment he signed the divorce papers, he smirked like he'd won the lottery. But the courtroom fell dead silent when the judge opened my late father's will. And suddenly, that smug smile vanished. I'm Ava Monroe. And this is the story of how I went from being dismissed and manipulated to reclaiming everything I thought I'd lost, including myself. 3 years ago, I was in love, or at least, I thought I was. I had just married Thomas Reed, a rising star in the world of corporate finance. Everyone said I was lucky. He was attractive, successful, and came from an affluent, well-known family. We met at a charity auction. I was there volunteering as a high school teacher, while Thomas was bidding on a painting that cost more than I made in a year. He was charismatic, smooth, and generous in all the ways that made a girl believe in fairy tales. Within 6 months, he proposed with a diamond that sparkled more than any future I had imagined. Of course I said yes. I thought I was stepping into a new life filled with promise. But fairy tales have a habit of hiding the wolves behind smiles. At first, it was small things. Comments like, "It's cute that you love teaching," or, "I admire your passion, even if it doesn't pay." I brushed it off. He was older, more experienced. I thought he was just being supportive in his own way. Then came the dinner parties. Thomas would host his colleagues at our home. And when someone asked what I did, he'd laugh lightly and say, "Ava's a schoolteacher. She plays with books while I handle the big numbers." I'd force a smile, even though every word chipped away at me. I tried joining their conversations about the economy, real estate, the stock market, but Thomas would cut me off with, "Sweetheart, let's not bore the room." His friends chuckled politely, and I'd excuse myself to the kitchen with my heart sinking a little more each time. Still, I clung to the belief that maybe he just didn't know how to express himself. Maybe he really loved me but didn't know how to show it. I wanted to believe the man who proposed under fairy lights with poetry in his voice was still there somewhere. But what hurt the most was how he treated my father's memory. My dad, Richard Monroe, had passed away the year before I met Thomas. He'd been a maintenance foreman at a manufacturing plant, a man who fixed things with quiet hands and loved with his entire heart. He wasn't rich or flashy, but he was everything a father should be. Thomas never let me forget our difference in background. "Not everyone's born into money," he'd say, almost pityingly. "Your father did the best he could. But let's be real, Ava. You're lucky you married up." When I cried on the anniversary of Dad's death, Thomas would sigh and say, "You've got to stop living in the past. Mourning him won't change where you came from." But my father taught me something Thomas never understood, that real worth isn't about wealth. It's about integrity, about how you treat people when no one is looking. And deep down, I knew my father's wisdom would outlast any bank account. 2 years into our marriage, the mask began to crack. Thomas started coming home late, claiming it was work. His phone buzzed constantly, and he'd always step outside to answer it. If I asked questions, he grew vague or irritated. The affectionate gestures vanished, and the lavish dinners turned into leftovers eaten in silence. I felt invisible. I poured myself into my students instead. One girl, Elena, was falling behind because of issues at home. I stayed late to tutor her, encouraged her, and when she got a full scholarship to her dream college, she hugged me and said, "Ms. Monroe, you changed my life." In those moments, I remembered who I was. Someone who made a difference. Someone who mattered. But at home, I was fading. Thomas made me believe I was lucky he married someone so ordinary. "You should be grateful," he said once, "that I saw potential in you despite your background." And the worst part? I started to believe him. Then came the night everything changed. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. I came home from a parent-teacher conference, still glowing from a breakthrough I'd had with one of my toughest students. I wanted to share it with Thomas, to have him say he was proud of me, even just once. I found him in his office, laughing on the phone. I hesitated in the hallway. "David, she's clueless. It's almost adorable," he said, chuckling. "She still thinks I married her for love. Honestly, I deserve an award for this performance." My breath caught. "Of course I got a prenup," he continued. his tone cold and calculating. When the divorce happens, she gets nothing. The land her dad left? Already under my name. Technically, she signed it as collateral when we refinanced. She doesn't even realize what she gave up. My heart pounded so loud. I thought he'd hear it through the wall. She's been easy to control. Throw a few gifts her way. Play the loving husband. And boom, access to everything. You're right, David. 3 years pretending to love someone so basic? Worth it for what I'm getting in return. I stumbled back like I'd been punched. Everything clicked, the coldness, the controlling nature, the way he pushed me to sign document after document without questioning a thing. That night, I lay next to him in bed, his arm draped over me like nothing had happened. I stared at the ceiling, trying to quiet the scream building in my chest. The next morning, he kissed my forehead and told me to have a great day at school. Like always, like he hadn't just shattered everything I believed. I called in sick. I spent the day combing through every financial document I could find, bank statements, deeds, insurance papers, contracts I'd stupidly signed. I had to know the truth. And what I found made me sick. Everything was in his name. The house, the accounts, even the land my father had left me. Land that had sentimental value beyond anything money could measure, had been signed over as collateral for our mortgage. I didn't even know what I had signed away. By the time he came home that night with wine and flowers, I was a ghost inside my own body. Ava, darling, he said with that same smooth charm that once made me feel special. We need to talk. Thomas sat beside me on the couch, holding my hands like a concerned partner. I've been thinking about our marriage, Ava, and I think we both know it isn't working anymore. I stared at him, trying not to show what I already knew. What do you mean? He sighed deeply, as if he was about to deliver some profound truth. We've grown apart. You want different things. I've tried to make this work, but I think it's time we ended it. You want a divorce? I asked, my voice low. He nodded, offering a soft, pitying smile. I've already spoken to my lawyer. We can make this quick and simple. You don't need to worry about anything. I'll take care of the legal fees. He reached for a manila folder on the coffee table and slid it toward me. All you have to do is sign these, and we can both move on with our lives. I stared at the folder. And the house? Well, he said with a shrug. It's in my name, and I've been covering the mortgage. So I'll keep it, but don't worry, you'll get a settlement. Enough to get you a nice apartment. Maybe go back to school if you'd like. I pressed further. And the land my father left me? Thomas's confident mask flickered for just a moment. Ava, we've been over this. That land was used as collateral. It's tied up in the mortgage. Once the house sells, the bank gets paid first. Whatever's left will be split fairly. You'll be taken care of. He was lying so casually, so confidently, that if I hadn't heard that phone call, I might have believed him. I need some time to think, I said. His smile tightened just slightly. Of course, sweetheart, but the sooner we file, the easier it will be for both of us. That night, after he went to bed, I read every word of the divorce papers. As I expected, they were heavily slanted in his favor. I'd get a small sum, just enough to scrape by for a short while. Meanwhile, he would walk away with everything: the house, the cars, the investments, and yes, my father's land. I felt like I was drowning. But then something shifted in me. I remembered the way Elena had hugged me after earning her scholarship. I remembered the way my father used to look at me like I could take on the world. And I remembered the fire I used to carry before Thomas dimmed it. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. The next morning, I called in another sick day and reached out to a colleague at school, who referred me to a divorce attorney named Lynn Holloway. Lynn was sharp, experienced, and didn't mince words. After I explained everything and showed her the documents I'd signed, she leaned back in her chair. Ava, I won't lie to you. It's going to be a tough battle. Your husband's legal team clearly knew what they were doing. So, I'm just supposed to lose everything? Not necessarily, she said, but we need to move smart. Tell me more about the land your father left you. It's just an empty piece of property outside town. A few acres and an old barn. I don't even know why he bought it. He never did anything with it. Lynn's eyes narrowed. Have you ever had it appraised? Or checked the county records? No. Thomas always said it wasn't worth much. That's why he used it as collateral. Lynn stood. Then the first thing we're doing is getting it appraised. And I want to dig into your father's finances. You'd be surprised what people leave behind, especially the quiet, careful types. I left her office feeling a strange mix of dread and hope. My father had lived paycheck to paycheck his whole life. What could possibly be hiding in his finances? 2 weeks later, Lynn called. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the excitement beneath it. Ava, are you sitting down? I was in the teacher's lounge grading papers. And I stood up so fast I nearly knocked over my chair. What is it? I had the land appraised. It turns out it's sitting on a natural gas deposit. A big one. I blinked. What does that mean? It means that land could be worth millions, possibly upwards of $10 million. Depending on the market. I nearly dropped my phone. What? And that's not all. Lynn continued. I found records of a trust your father set up before he passed away. It's been dormant because the bank couldn't locate you. Your married name threw them off. A trust? Your father was quietly investing for decades. Small amounts, diversified stocks, and it paid off. The account is now worth over $2 million. My knees gave out, and I sat down hard. But how? My dad was a maintenance foreman. Lynn's voice softened. He lived modestly, yes, but he planned carefully, saved, invested. He did it for you. Suddenly, I could hear my father's voice again, telling me to always look out for myself. To never underestimate the value of quiet strength. Thomas had underestimated both of us. When the divorce proceedings began, Thomas strolled into court with the same cocky grin he'd worn the night I caught him on the phone. He was flanked by a polished legal team from one of the top firms in the city. He looked over at me, almost smugly, as if he pitied me for trying to stand up to him. During the preliminary hearings, his lawyers argued that he was offering me a generous settlement out of goodwill. Mr. Reed has been the primary earner and financial provider throughout the marriage. One of them said, despite his wife's limited contribution to the household income, he's willing to provide her with support so she can move on with dignity. Thomas nodded, all serious concern and faux empathy. It was a performance, but I was done being part of his show. Lynn had advised me to keep quiet about the land and the trust until the final hearing. Let them feel like they're winning. She said, it'll make the truth hit that much harder. She was right. As we walked into the final hearing, Thomas was all smiles. Ava, he said smoothly, I hope we can keep this civil. I smiled back. Of course. The judge, Judge Keller, began by stating the usual formalities. We are here today to finalize the dissolution of marriage between Ava Monroe and Thomas Reed. Are there any disputes regarding the division of assets? Thomas's lawyer stood. No significant disputes, Your Honor. The property in question is minimal. The marital home was purchased and maintained solely by Mr. Reed. There is an inherited piece of land that Mrs. Monroe brought into the marriage, which was used as collateral for the mortgage. Mr. Reed is proposing it be sold to satisfy the remaining debt. The judge looked at me. Ms. Monroe, do you have a response? I stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I believe there is more context to that land than what's been presented. Lynn joined me, placing a thick folder on the judge's desk. Your Honor, she began. Recent appraisals have revealed that the inherited land contains a significant natural gas deposit. Its estimated value is over $12 million. Additionally, Mrs. Monroe is the sole beneficiary of a trust established by her late father. The account, untouched and legally separate from marital assets, is valued at just over $2 million. Thomas's mouth fell open. His lawyer froze. Lynn continued. We also have evidence, including signed documents and a recorded phone call, showing that Mr. Reed was aware of these assets and attempted to manipulate Mrs. Monroe into signing over rights under false pretenses. The courtroom went silent. Judge Keller looked over her glasses at Thomas. Mr. Reed, were you aware of the true value of your wife's inherited property? Thomas stammered. No, Your Honor. I didn't know. Lynn reached into her briefcase and produced the audio file. We have a recording, Your Honor, of Mr. Reed stating clearly his intent to divorce Mrs. Monroe once he secured control of the land. The judge's expression hardened. Play it. As the audio played, Thomas sank lower in his seat, his face pale. When it ended, Judge Keller turned to him. Mr. Reed, your actions show clear intent to defraud your wife. Based on the evidence, I am declaring the prenup void. Mrs. Monroe will retain full ownership of her inherited assets and trust. Furthermore, she will receive half of all remaining marital assets and have her legal fees covered by Mr. Reed. Thomas looked like he'd been hit by a truck. I looked at him once. And this time, it was me wearing the calm, collected smile. When court adjourned, Thomas didn't move. He just sat there, hands clenched into fists on the table, eyes blank as if someone had just unplugged him from reality. The man who once strutted around with a smirk had finally come face to face with the consequences of his deception. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. Lynn and I walked side by side through the parking lot. And for the first time in years, I felt free. That went better than I expected, she said with a proud smile. Thank you for everything, I whispered. You didn't just help me win a case. You helped me get my life back. She stopped and placed a hand on my shoulder. No, Ava, you did that. You were the one who stood up, who fought, who refused to be a victim. Don't ever forget that. I nodded, feeling emotions swell inside me. Relief, gratitude, but mostly, clarity. Thomas Reed had underestimated me, just like he had underestimated my father. But now he knew, and more importantly, so did I. A few weeks later, the dust began to settle. The financial assets were separated, the legal fees paid, the house was officially on the market, and Thomas had been ordered to vacate by the end of the month. I didn't want it. It was filled with too many ghosts. Too many fake smiles, empty gestures, and cold silences. I was more than happy to walk away from the marble countertops and the pristine lawn. What I truly wanted was a fresh start. I drove out to my father's land one Saturday morning. It was a quiet stretch of rolling acres with an old barn that leaned slightly to the left. Its red paint faded by decades of sun and rain. I walked the perimeter slowly, letting the silence settle around me. There was something sacred about this place. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. My father had poured his life into securing something lasting for me. And while he hadn't lived to see what it would become, his love echoed in every corner of it. I found the old metal lock on the barn door and jiggled the key Thomas never bothered to ask about. Inside, it was dusty, filled with rusted tools and stacked wooden crates. In one of the crates, tucked under a pile of yellowed newspapers, I found something I hadn't expected, a small, worn box with my name scribbled across the top in my dad's handwriting. Inside was a letter. Dear Ava, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. But I want you to know that every decision I made in my life, every sacrifice, every long shift, every dollar saved, was for you. You may not understand the value of this land right now, but one day you will. And I hope when that day comes, you remember what I always told you. Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. Know it for yourself. Be strong, be kind, be smarter than they expect. And above all, love yourself. Even when others forget to. Love always. Dad. Tears streamed down my face before I finished the last line. I clutched the letter to my chest and sat in the hay-dusted barn. Crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of love and protection that still wrapped itself around me. Even in his absence, I stayed out there for hours, thinking about what I wanted to do next. I could sell the land and walk away with millions. That would be easy, but something told me that wasn't the right move. Not yet. Instead, I started making calls. I met with city officials, consultants, environmental engineers. I wasn't just a teacher anymore. I was a woman with options. With power. And I wanted to use that power wisely. The gas company made several offers to buy the mineral rights. Lynn helped me negotiate until we reached an agreement that would provide consistent, long-term income while allowing me to retain full ownership of the land. I wasn't just financially secure. I was building something with intention. One evening, I received an unexpected call. Ava, it's Thomas. I stared at the screen before answering. What do you want? There was a long pause. I don't know where else to go. I've lost everything. I sighed. And that's supposed to make me feel what? Guilty? No, he said quickly. I didn't know the land was worth anything. I didn't know about the trust. But you knew how to manipulate me. You knew how to chip away at my confidence every single day until I didn't recognize myself anymore." His voice cracked. "I messed up. I know I did. I thought I was being smart, securing our future." "Our future?" I laughed, cold and sharp. "You weren't securing our future. You were stealing mine." "Ava, please, just give me a chance to explain. I've hit rock bottom." "Then maybe that's where you need to be." "Thomas, because I'm finally above ground, and I'm not going back." I hung up. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and watched the stars. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need revenge or apologies. What I had was so much better: peace and purpose. The next few months were a whirlwind. I partnered with a nonprofit that supported underfunded schools, using part of my trust to launch a grant in my father's name. The Richard Monroe now helped schools across the state access the resources they needed, from books and supplies to after-school programs. I also returned to teaching, but this time at a leadership level. I applied and was accepted as the assistant principal at a high school not far from where I grew up. I wasn't the same woman who walked into court broken and afraid. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. One afternoon, while overseeing a school event, I saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Elena. She had just finished her first year of college and had come back to volunteer as a mentor for younger students. "Miss Ava," she cried, running to hug me. I smiled. "You dropped the Monroe. You must be growing up." She laughed. "I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for you." "No, Elena," I said softly. "You got there because you believed in yourself." She looked at me with a smile that nearly broke my heart. "Yeah, but you believed first." That moment reminded me why I had fought so hard, not for money or revenge, but for the woman I was always meant to be. Someone who built people up. Someone who didn't need validation from a man in a tailored suit. Someone who finally knew her worth. Months passed, and my life transformed in ways I never imagined. What started as heartbreak had become a rebirth. I wasn't just Ava Monroe, the teacher who survived a bitter divorce. I was Ava Monroe, daughter of Richard Monroe, landowner, philanthropist, and most importantly, a woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's expectations. The Mitchell grant continued to grow. Schools began reaching out from across the country. I was invited to speak at education conferences, asked to consult on how to create systems that truly served students in need. Each time I stepped on a stage or into a meeting room, I carried my father's values with me: humility, resilience, and integrity. But life has a way of circling back. One cloudy afternoon in early spring, I received a letter from Thomas's attorney. He was requesting mediation, not to reopen the divorce case, but to ask for forgiveness. At first, I ignored it. Then a second letter came. This time, handwritten by Thomas himself. "Ava, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. Not after what I did. But I'm not writing to make excuses. I've spent the past 6 months reflecting on everything, on the man I became, and the woman I betrayed. Losing you wasn't just about the divorce. It was about realizing I never truly knew you, or appreciated you. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm just asking if you can find it in your heart to meet with me. Even once. To talk. To hear me. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying to change. Thomas." I stared at the letter for a long time. There was no manipulation in his words. No charm or flattery. Just honesty. Maybe for the first time since I'd met him. I spoke to Lynn before making any decision. "You don't owe him anything, Ava," she said firmly. "You already won." "I know," I said quietly. "This isn't about winning. It's about closure." She nodded slowly. "Then do it on your terms." So I agreed to meet him in a public cafe near the courthouse. The same one where I'd met Lynn the first time we discussed the divorce. When I arrived, Thomas was already there. He looked different, not broken, but humbled. His tailored suits had been replaced with a plain gray sweater and jeans. He stood as I approached, hands trembling slightly. "Ava," he said softly, "you look." "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "Let's not start with compliments." He sat down quickly, nodding. "Of course." There was a long pause. "I lost the house," he finally said. "The firm let me go after the court ruling. Word got around. No one wants to hire a man who tried to scam his own wife. I folded my arms. So this is what remorse looks like? No, he replied. This is what rock bottom looks like. I didn't say anything. I let him sit in the silence he used to fill with his arrogance. I thought money was everything. He continued. That success meant control. That love was leverage. But you were the only person who saw me for more than my bank account. And I spit on that. I took a slow breath. Why now, Thomas? Why reach out? Because I needed you to know, you were never boring. You were never small. I was small. You had everything I didn't: compassion, purpose, values. And I resented that. For the first time since our marriage ended, I felt sorry for him. Not in the way he once pitied me, but in the way you feel for someone who lost a chance they never truly understood. I appreciate the apology, I said, but forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to anything. I'm not here to reopen a chapter I already closed. I understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to look you in the eyes and tell you I was wrong. I stood up. You were, but I'm glad you said it. Take care of yourself, Thomas. He didn't try to stop me as I walked away. Outside, the clouds began to break, sunlight piercing through in streaks across the sidewalk. And for the first time in years, I felt completely unburdened. There was no weight, no doubt, no unfinished business. That night, I visited my father's grave. I hadn't been in a while, not because I forgot, but because I wanted to come back with something more than sadness. I brought fresh wildflowers from the land he left me, now thriving with native plants and a restored barn I'd converted into a community resource center. I knelt by the stone that read, Richard Monroe, loving father, quiet protector. A man is not what he earns, but what he leaves behind. Hey, Dad, I whispered, you were right, about everything. I told him about the grant, the students, the school, and how I'd learned to love myself the way he always had. I told him about Thomas, not to relive the pain, but to release it, and I promised him that I'd never let anyone define my worth again. When I stood to leave, a breeze brushed past me, gentle and warm. It felt like a hand on my shoulder, a reminder that he was still here. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a leadership conference for women in education. It was a huge event, broadcast live. As I stepped onto the stage, the spotlight didn't scare me. I smiled at the audience and took a deep breath. Good evening. My name is Ava Monroe, and I used to think my story was one of betrayal. But now I know it's a story of transformation. I told them everything, not just the legal battle, but the emotional one. The journey from being told I was just a teacher to standing as a woman who had rebuilt her identity, her purpose, and her strength. I saw tears in the crowd, nods of encouragement, and eyes full of understanding. I ended with the words I now lived by. Your worth is not determined by what someone sees in you. It's determined by what you believe about yourself, even when no one else does. The applause was thunderous, but more than that, it was affirming. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Later that night, I sat on the back porch of my newly built home, a cozy place on the edge of my father's land. I watched the sun set over the trees, holding a cup of tea, the air filled with quiet contentment. I had no idea what the future would bring, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Because now, I knew who I was. And that, finally, was enough. The end. Thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments what part of Ava's journey inspired you most. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and rate this story out of 10 below.